Well, what about the Islamic scientists from the Islamic Golden Age that calculated the circumference of the Earth, the Al-Khwarizmi and Al-Biruni?
Yeah.
Does anybody know much about them? Or
yeah, there's actually quite a few calculations from the Middle Ages, and credit to them, because despite having not having the technology that we have today, they weren't far off.
3% wasn't the closest something?
Yeah, so I mean, they used trigonometry, they used spherical geometry, and they calculated that the Earth was 12,728 kilometers. That's in diameter. So yeah, they were only off by 37 kilometers. So considering that was many, many years ago, many moons ago, that's actually quite phenomenal, that is. But, going back on to, somebody mentioned Christopher Columbus, and there's a myth that he was the one who discovered the Earth to be round, and it became attributed to him. And the very first people actually to make that claim that the Earth is round, geoid shape, it can be traced all the way back to Aristotle and people of that era, the Greeks. But also the sailors, they were able to observe with their eyes, because what they noticed was, as people were traveling, eventually they would come and they would basically dip, and that was through their own observation, and they concluded from that the Earth can't possibly be flat. It has to be round. So I mean, you're talking ancient studies, but with regards to what Muslims have said in the past, that's, I think, the main discussion today. And unless the Muslim scholar was also a scientist with some scientific backing, there's no harm in saying that certain scholars were wrong in some of the positions which they postulated. I think one of the scholars which is going to be mentioned is Imam Qurtubi, a phenomenal scholar, and also one of the scholars who suggested that the Earth is flat. But I have no qualms in saying, and neither does any other scholar of repute or any student of knowledge who has any idea about who Imam Qurtubi was. But I believe it to be wrong. I think he was mistaken, and I believe all those scholars who suggested the Earth was flat were very much mistaken. And the bulk of scholars, the majority of scholars, they suggested that the Earth is round, geoid shape, but none of them suggested it was flat. Imam Qurtubi, as an example, he said a few other things where he was really mistaken. So we mentioned this before, where Imam Qurtubi mentioned Sayyidah Maryam was a prophetess. So that's something which is in his tafsir. He mentions that, but that's categorically wrong. We have no qualms in saying that it's wrong, because we believe prophets to be males, and there was no female prophet or prophetess. So there's no qualms in saying that if a scholar suggested this and it goes against what we know in modern science, using modern technology, that it conforms to, if the flat earth was explicitly mentioned in the Quran, explicitly, and I don't mean interpretations of verses, but explicitly mentioned, then you can't go against it, okay? Then we believe it to be flat. But that's not the case. But I think that's what the discussion is, what's going to revolve around today. That's what it's going to be about. And I think there's a lot of things which flat earthers do miss and try to sugarcoat. But I think those discussions will come up when Shaykh comes on.
And I think it's a great source of pride, isn't it? What the Islamic scientists did back then, and their figures have almost been validated by modern calculations. And that they're remembered even in I mentioned non-Muslim circles as people who did all that work. And just like the vaccine discovery, the German-Turkish scientists couple for COVID vaccine who've done all the research, they spent a lifetime researching, and they finally come up with the solution. And that's also a source of pride, isn't it, for Muslims? And
Majid, you've got to say German because they're good. if it was something bad, then that's when the Turkish is to be mentioned.
Right. Okay. You're right there as well. But we need to highlight that Turkish origin, don't we? And their Muslim, heritage as well.
Definitely. But you won't hear or see that in the Western press.
Yeah. Well, that's what we need to. Yeah. We need to call up on that and highlight that. But I'm just saying, people like the anti-vaxxers are taking it all away from them in a sense, aren't they? And we can't give them that credit then if we take that away from them. But
yeah,
anyway,
that's actually a very good analogy. I never thought of it like that. To contrast anti-vaxxers with flat earthers. I do think it's actually a good analogy. You don't appreciate the vaccine if there's anti-vaxxers around. I guess the anti-vaxxers do have a certain point to take, that have, legs to stand on. But to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and to categorize all vaccines as dangerous and harmful, I don't think that's fair, and it doesn't do justice to the research of those scientists.
That's very good coming from an anti-vaxxer.
I'm not entirely an anti-vaxxer, but I am with certain ones, and that's not because of conspiracies or anything, but that's down to research, and that's why he's not talking from whims. He's talking from research that he's done, and that's why he's concluded what he's concluded. If it was somebody who just, plucked it out of thin air and said, no, I believe that the Earth is actually a triangle, then it's not really a discussion worth entertaining, because there's no backbone to it, there's no sufficient research, there's no data to support it. But that's not the case here. And it's the same with anti-vaxxers. The bulk of them do have something to go on. Many of them have actually suffered from, vaccines where, they complain about certain things that they have to deal with now for the rest of their life, physically speaking, that is. And they weren't, they never had to prior to that vaccine. So that vaccine has just harmed them, and that's how they feel. So, people's experiences are very, very important. You have to take that on board. And many people have suffered with certain vaccines.
Yeah. I mean, this is 90 or 95% rate of what it's called, the rate. So there's 5% that it doesn't work on, so those 5% could be harmed if it doesn't work on them. You're right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can tell you from experience, when my father had a triple bypass operation, they told him that there's a 5% chance that you could potentially have a stroke.
Yep.
And he was one of those 5%. So it does happen. It does happen.
Yeah. And if whoever suffers there, that's that treatment of the vaccine or medicine is, it might as well be fake, because it's not worked for them. So that's understandable.
I mean, even with kids' vaccines, they'll tell you that there's a certain percentage of fatalities. So there's always that possibility, but again, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater and categorize and pigeonhole every single vaccine as dangerous. That's not the way forward, and but it's a very, very good analogy.
I'd just like to mention one thing before we start with the Shaykh, inshallah, is that my own research is still ongoing. I haven't concluded my research at the moment yet, but just from what I've researched, I'm more towards the flat Earth theory than the globe one. Just thought I'd mention that just before. There is a video that I wanted to just let everyone see, because we were just talking about that, and it just kind of links in with that. So just put the screen share on.
What brought the intrigue on then? We all taught round Earth, right from school, and then.
For me, it was another student, one of my classmates. He mentioned it, and at the first time when I heard it, I laughed. I completely laughed, and I thought, what's this guy on about? Is it crazy? And then when you started explaining it more and more, I was interested. So I carried on doing my research. A good 6-7 months I did my research. After that, I looked at the Quranic side as well, and then actually my own research as well regarding the Quran and the tafsir and stuff. So after that, it's about a year after, I kind of had that in mind that I'm more towards the flat side than I am towards the globe. There are both valid opinions, and I do think that both sides do have a lot of strong arguments as well. So, but just I think the flat side fits more with the tafsir and the hadith, etc.
So what does it mean for us then, if if that's the view? What does it mean for Muslims in terms of accepting that it's flat? Do we have to, or do we reject the other idea?
So, like Imam Ahmad Raza Khan, he has mentioned that although he says that the earth is round, but he said that the earth does not move, and he's contradicted the scientists on that. So according to him, he thinks it is quite important to believe that. So Wallahu alam, the scholars will need to, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh Saab.
Wa alaikum assalam.
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Yeah, I'm switching on the camera now.
Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah. How is everyone?
Alhamdulillah.
How many people do we have?
We have about 15 participants, all waiting for you, for your arrival.
Alhamdulillah. I'm here now.
Right, alhamdulillah. Right, we'll start the discussion. I think we've all been online for a while. So this discussion has been going for the past 40 minutes or so. It's quite interesting. Before I think we commence with flat Earth versus geoid round Earth, this idea that the Earth is flat, where did it originate? Not necessarily in terms of Muslims, but across the board, where did this idea come from that the Earth is actually flat? Who initiated it, and how did it become so widespread? To the point that even some Muslims then adopted it as a belief which is credible, and some people stand by it today.
So what did I miss out on your conversation prior to logging on?
Not much. So we were just talking about pro evidences to support the flat Earth theory, which we're going to mention again anyway. But we're looking at it from every angle, hopefully, to cover the topic entirely. So to address the issue of the flat Earth theory, before we get on to whether it's actually credible or not, who were the main proponents of the argument, who actually put it forth, before we see...
You want to initiate the discussion by looking at the historicity of the actual theory itself. That I'm not too aware of, but people tend to ascribe it to a Hellenistic period. But as we know that the geoid theory and or the globe Earth theory is also hailing from the Hellenistic times, when Greek scientists carried out experiments which were then emulated by Muslim scientists also, like Al-Biruni, rahimahullah. He actually carried out his test in modern day Pakistan. So in North Pakistan there's a mountain. He measured the angles and the geometric mathematical method of actually measuring the distance from where he was standing to the mountain, and then calculated the circumference of the globe. That is similar to a Greek experiment that was carried out with wells. So the sun, when it shone down onto the ground, the rays of the sun, they shine down water in wells, and the angles were measured, and the distance from the wells and then the using geometry, the angulation showed a curvature of the earth. So that's from the Hellenistic Greek period. And then we have even Stephen Hawking, he cites in A Brief History of Time, he gives a citation with Greek simple methods of the Greek scientists, where they mention 3 basic proofs, which are the hotly contested proofs, meaning the flat earth group, they debate this now. One is, the boat sailing on the horizon and then the sails going beneath the horizon. So this is something now disputed by flat earth theorists. But that was presented by Plato or Aristotle, one of the two, as a proof that there's a curvature to the earth. A second proof was the eclipse proof, which is that the earth comes between the sun and the moon, and a circular shape is shown on the moon. And a third proof was the constellations, like for instance the North Star. We observe the North Star, but as we go down south, we observe that the North Star and the constellations turn towards the horizon. So if we observe the North Star from here, we would observe the North Star going down towards the horizon. So these were 3 basic proofs that were presented. And then, like I mentioned, you had the calculations that were done in that early period. As for flat earth, what some people are citing now from the tafsirs, the commentaries of the Quran. So you have Imam al-Qurtubi, who was not, if you read the tafsir of Imam al-Qurtubi, which I deem as one of the best tafsirs, he was not adept in science of his time, unlike Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi. So they weren't contemporaries, but they were near contemporaries. And Imam Fakhruddin was more efficient in the sciences of his time. So Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, when his tafsir is more renowned in that regard, even in the sense of making sense of the identity of Dhul Qarnayn alayhi salam. So he attempts to make sense of who Dhul Qarnayn alayhi salam was by saying the only visible proof is maybe Alexander the Great. Now he could be wrong on that that assertion that Alexander is Dhul Qarnayn alayhi salam. The point is not whether he was right or wrong. The point is his methodology differing from Imam al-Qurtubi. While Imam al-Qurtubi, rahimahullah, his method was more the method of the fuqaha, the jurists, and his tafsir is an excellent tafsir for citation of legal rulings and linguistics, but he was not familiar with the sciences of his time. So when commenting on Surah Al-Ra'd, he simply gives the position, the given position of the scientists of his age. But what's interesting is the scientists of his age were not non-Muslim scientists. They were Muslim scientists. Meaning this was a period where Muslims were at their peak, apex of scientific thought. So Muslims at that time, like Biruni and others, I have Biruni's work here, in fact, with me. These scientists of their age, so this is one work of his, a 3-volume book. These are the near contemporaries of Al-Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah ta'ala. So when he's saying scientists say this, he's referring to Muslim scientists. He's not referring to the Christians in the Middle Ages who were in the dark ages at that time. So he says the outward of the Quran, which is the words mentioned in the Quran, the outward of the linguistics of the Quran entail that the earth is flat, meaning the verses that are mentioned in Surah Al-Nazi'at or وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا, the wordings like سُطِحَت, that it's a surface, the earth is a surface. While Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi rahimahullah states that the Quran was revealed for every type of person, that when the Bedouin recites the Quran, he understands that the earth is a surface from his view in the desert. And then when the scientist reads the same verses, he will know that this is referring to, as humanly possible with our limited bodies, we observe the earth, it's flat, it's livable. When we say livable, it doesn't negate being a rocky ground. It means we can place
Habitable.
vegetation into the vegetation can grow and whatnot. So therefore, the citations given from the other tafasir, the other commentaries of the Quran, what we have to take into account is that those scholars were not scientists who studied physical sciences, and therefore they took the outward meaning of the Quran. This brings me to just one final point before we move on in the discussion, is what I mentioned regarding dahaha. What I mentioned, that daha has two meanings, and it was stated by someone that this additional meaning of being rounded is not found in the lexicons. It's in fact cited by Shaykh Muhammad Sa'id Ramadan al-Buti rahimahullah in his book Min Rawa'i' al-Quran al-Kareem. The poetry is cited, meaning he gives a citation, and from that citation he gives you the linguistical meaning that this word daha has multiple meanings within one word. So it can come in the meaning of flattening something, but at the same time the same word can come in the meaning of placing something in a bowl shape. So Ibn Rumi, he mentions that he passed a baker, and the baker was turning the dough, and the dough turned into a circular shape, and then he would place and make the bread. And that's one of the linguistical meanings of daha also, which is found. Interestingly enough, he utilizes that to say that this alludes to the circular earth. Now, if we stuck solely to the tafasir of the Quran without any observation of what's around us, then people could say the Quran could be interpreted in both ways, as a circular earth and as a flat earth. But flat earth has many inherent flaws, so and therefore the discussion goes on to the flaws of flat earth, or the counterclaim that a circular earth has flaws, and a circular earth, believing in a geoid shaped earth, is anti-empiricism, anti-scientific, and goes against our sensory perception. This is the claim that must be debated, as well as looking at the adverse effect of claiming a flat earth. Meaning, one thing I wanted to mention, stationary earth or geocentric model is totally different to flat earth theory. Scholars ascribed to geocentric models. Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi believed in a stationary earth. That's also mentioned in his tafsir. Imam Ahmad Rida Khan also ascribed to a geocentric stationary earth, but Imam Ahmad Rida Khan did not believe the earth was flat, as is very clear from his own works and the works of his student Imam Zafruddin al-Bihari rahimahullah. You know this book, Tawdih al-Tawqit, the book of Imam Zafruddin al-Bihari. He utilizes almanacs, and they believed in a geocentric model, but they did not believe in a flat earth, which is very clear from their astronomical works. I am working on the makhtut, the manuscript of Imam Ahmad Rida Khan's commentary on Sharh al-Jighmini. So his super commentary on Sharh al-Jighmini, this is the tahqiq I'm doing on the Jighmini, which is also classical Muslim astronomy. And this work and the commentators do not propose a flat earth theory. If they believed in a geocentric model, they did not believe in a flat earth. So this is something to take into account, because some people are mistaking Al-Imam Ahmad Rida Khan's stance of geocentric model, which is a totally different discussion, as being an approval of a flat earth theory. So this is the inception point of our discussion, inshallah.
Inshallah. Right. I think there's a lot of points to take on board there. So without further ado, let's get straight into some of those points. Were there any? I mean, before I let Ustad Habib and others come in, were there any scholars of repute other than Imam Qurtubi who suggested flat Earth as opposed to the geoid Earth? Apart from Imam Qurtubi, that is.
Yes, there are citations people bring up from Al-Imam Jalaluddin al-Mahalli, rahimahullah, al-Shawkani, some of the earlier commentators. But at the same time, you have the likes of Al-Imam al-Baydawi, Al-Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, Al-Imam al-Alusi, who mentioned the geoid earth. So Al-Imam Alusi al-Baghdadi, rahimahullah, the author of Ruh al-Ma'ani, he's a commentator on the Quran who's of more recent times. And likewise, he would mention more contemporary issues in his tafsir. So for instance, he makes reference to Ashkenazi Jews in his commentary on Surah Al-Kahf in reference to Ya'juj and Ma'juj. He makes reference to even that theory, meaning there's a theory some people have made that the Ashkenazi Jews are Ya'juj and Ma'juj. He was familiar with these type of positions. So in his commentary on the Quran, he mentions the geoid earth. Likewise, Al-Imam al-Baydawi and Al-Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi. And if someone done an actual checking up of various commentaries of the Quran, like Abu al-Hayyan al-Andalusi's and other commentaries of Al-Quran al-Kareem, contemporary scholars like whom Shaykh As-Sabuni, who is one of the leading commentators of the Quran from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, he again refutes flat earth and approves of the geoid earth, and corrects those scholars prior to him who made the mistake of believing that the earth is actually flat, because it has inherent flaws. And the rule is that the Quran does not contradict that which is empirical. Now, two things that should be mentioned here. One is the meaning of theory, and the second is what is meant by empiricism. Theory does not entail that something is just theoretical and not actually provable. This is a major flaw some people have in understanding what is meant by theory in scientific terms. It means it's the best explanation available. So scientifically speaking, for scientists, evolution theory is the best explanation for them. So evolution as a whole is the best explanation for them. It doesn't mean that we, again, human evolution for us would be disbelief, kufr. But as far as the scientific method is concerned, that's the best explanation for them. But it does not entail it can undergo, it cannot undergo change, because Richard Dawkins himself states in The Devil's Chaplain that in 100 years from now, evolution theory would undergo major change, that it would be unrecognizable or totally changed. While with the geoid earth, the claim is the following, that it's the best model for all practical purposes. But an additional claim is that there are human eyewitnesses who have seen the circular globe, and this is being falsified now by flat earth theorists. So the flat earth theorists are claiming that NASA is not only NASA, but anyone who claims to have seen the geoid shape of the earth are in fact actors. Over 200 manned missions that have gone into space and observed the Earth, over 200 missions, are all fake. These are actors. Additionally, the moon landings are fake. So this goes into different territory now, meaning when we go into the territory of the moon landings, we need to answer the objections made against the moon landings, then the 200 plus missions. Then you also have the International Space Station above us, which goes around the Earth, and you can check when the space station will be above you. You can observe the space station. The flat earthers claim it's a fake, meaning it's not real, the space station that we can observe. Then the flat earthers also claim that they have observation. So they bring videos, and most flat earthers are convinced by YouTube videos that when you go to a certain height, you can observe that the earth is flat. This is the claim being made. So what is being presented is a falsification of all empirical proof regarding the earth being geoid, and a claim that there is empirical proof for the earth being flat, like observation through a telescope. So if someone observes the horizon on a telescope, they would be able to see a boat from over 70 miles, for instance, or a city from over 100 miles from the coast, which they say falsifies a curved earth, because according to the geoid model, that would mean every 9 miles the earth curves slightly every 9 miles. So there must be a point where the observed object goes below the horizon. But they are saying, they are claiming with these videos that they are able to see cities or boats on the horizon from over 70 miles, for instance. These videos are being placed on YouTube and being claimed as fact. So there are two things here. One is the geoid model and the flat earth in the Quran, which we've already cleared that this is mentioned by two groups of commentators. And then which one of these is empirical? Is it flat earth or is it geoid earth? Additionally, even the Pakistani army and the Pakistani intelligence and the Pakistani government would be in on the conspiracy, because by making the Ghori missile and such type of technology is utilizes a geoid earth theory, meaning in missile targeting. The science utilized is the same. So that would mean it's a conspiracy of collusion of all the world's governments, including Pakistan, including the top scientists like Dr. Abdul Qadir, and everyone else has collusion with NASA in stating that the earth is in fact geoid shaped. And then we have many questions regarding the satellites. Before just finishing this point, an example of this is the images. The flat earthers claim that the images are fake. So they say that the image of the globe, for instance, is a fake image. But in reality, the satellites take images of portions of the globe. So what some of these NASA scientists do is they make a mesh of all the various pictures, and then they Photoshop the picture. So the satellite is taking an image of a portion of the globe, and what they do is they gather all these various pictures and they make a Photoshopped image. So the Photoshopped image is, what is being claimed is that because this is Photoshopped, therefore all the images are fake. But satellites are not only utilized by America and NASA, they are used by China, Russia, and various other governments, and therefore there's a conspiracy of collusion. And these are additional points to take into consideration, as well as the deal that these governments have with regard to Antarctica and the claims made regarding Antarctica.
You want to get in on this?
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I think what's important is that we understand what exactly the model of the flat Earth theory is as well, from the flat earthers, what they present. And I'm just going to share my screen. 1 second. Okay, so a lot of people that have this conception that it's a disk flying in or in levitating in space and in the air, and there's an edge to it, and people are just going to fall off the edge if they don't go. And if you can see the images that people have supposed to place as the flat Earth. So the basic outline of the whole theory is that there's a flat plane, and of course that is with high and low terrain, mountainous areas within which are low terrain as well. That the North Pole is in the center, South Pole being, or you can say Antarctica being, a 360-degree ice wall encircling the lands, and a sky that's over the Earth, which meets the Earth as well, and that is what is known as the dome, the firmament, and it's something which is an actual structure that can be penetrated as well. And the sun and the moon being roughly the same size. So that is a basic outline of the model that they give. So you can say that this image here of what is presented at the flat Earth is something which they use as an example to show. So a lot of people that ask this question, that how is it possible that the sun being so far and there being day and night? So it's not that the sun's far. We say the flat earthers say that the sun is local as well as the moon as well, and they're roughly the same size. And like this, Islamically, obviously, we know that in the Quran, Allah has mentioned regarding the 7 skies, the 7 earths. So there's opinions in this. Some have the opinion that each earth is, as we have the Antarctic circle, the 360 circle, ice circle of our earth. Behind this, there's other lands, and they will have their barrier. And like this are 7 eccentric circles like this, and each of them, on top of each, there is the sky. So first sky will be there, second sky will be here, third, and so on, all the way down to 7 skies. And if you look at it, that's from a projection of above. If you look at it from the side view, it will look probably something like this. This is what they give an example of. That's one opinion. And the other opinion is that we have our Earth, and below our Earth there are 7 more. And some say that they are joined, some say they are not joined. And then on the edge of each of them 7 Earths, there is the sky, as you can see here. And this is just one of the old Islamic maps, which also shows a flat Earth with the mountain around. So that is you can say the model that is presented of the flat Earth. In regards to a question that I have for Shaykh Asrar is, what would we say the sky is? Is this something which is, some people say it's just the atmospheres, some people say it's different opinions. What would you say that the sky would be?
You see, the word sky in the Quran, you have as-sama and you have as-samawat. The word as-sama is used in the Quran, utilized in the Quran in 2 senses. One is whatever is above us. So whenever you see the word as-sama in the Quran, in the singular form, you will find that the word refers to whatever is above us, and sometimes it refers to sab'a samawat, like ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى إِلَى السَّمَاءِ فَسَوَّاهُنَّ سَبْعَ سَمَاوَاتٍ. So ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى إِلَى السَّمَاءِ, as-sama' here is used in the singular, but then the Quran says فَسَوَّاهُنَّ سَبْعَ سَمَاوَاتٍ, meaning that sama was made into sab'a samawat. Additionally, the verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says regarding the heavens and the earth, كَانَتَا رَتْقًا فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا. كَانَتَا رَتْقًا, that they were one unit, فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا, and we separated them. This is referring to the creation of the seven heavens. But then later on in the Quran, you find verses which mention as-sama in the singular form, referring to the clouds and referring to the rains. That means that the singular form is utilized for the atmosphere above us, and samawat, the plural, is in reference to 7 metaphysical planes that exist beyond the known universe, which are we know from the ahadith of the 7 planes that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam ascended through. So as the 7 heavens is in reference to the 7 planes in the metaphysical realm. And then for further detail, you can refer to Shaykh Abdullah Sirajuddin's book, Hadiyul Quran al-Kareem, which is a work on the universes, and he covers the issue of the 7 planets. So the 7 Earth-like planets, he states, are 6 planets that are in space below this planet, meaning if someone were to travel out into space, they would find 6 Earth-like planets within space below Earth. He doesn't endorse the 7 layers of Earth, and he also explains the 7 concentric samawat as being the 7 heavens which exist metaphysically. In Sayyid Muhammad bin Alawi, rahimahullah, in Zubdatul Itqan, he mentions the point regarding as-sama in the singular form, and he states that the singular form generally is used for the atmosphere above us. So as-sama, according to the Quran, is the atmosphere above us. And inshallah, as we go along, there's with regard to the flat earth theory, there are inherent flaws in what is presented by the flat earth theorists. For instance, the denial of the absence of atmosphere in space. These are a few things that we shall discuss, inshallah.
My second question will be linking to that regarding the sky again, is in the books of Tafsir, when they explain it, they mention the words as a qubba, as a dome. How would we explain that in regards to the Tafsir? Will we say that they were mistaken in this regards, or what we say that? And also, there's a hadith in Sunan Abu Dawood in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was paraphrasing, in which he mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the arsh is above the skies, and in the hadith it's lahakada, and it says that the finger was then made into the shape of like a dome. So how would we give an interpretation of these ayats as well?
So with the first thing, the Qubbatu Sama, what you're referring to is referred to in the books as Qubbatu Sama. Qubbatu Sama is a conceptual idea which refers to the vision. So when we visualize the skies, for instance, if we're standing in the desert and we visualize the sky looks like a qubba. This is very clear from their works. It's a conceptual construct. It's not in reference to a physical sky, but even if we accept it's physical, what that means is from the horizon, from one point of the horizon to the other, we observe qubbatu sama, which is the globular shape of our observation and the atmosphere above us. Like the sky is blue. Why is the sky blue? Because of the sunlight giving that color to the particles of water in the atmosphere. So that's why the sky is blue. Meaning when we observe a blue sky, we observe the blue sky simply because the sun is the rays of the sun are going through the water particles in the sky. So this is what is referred to as qubbatu sama. For this, you check Shaykh Muhammad Muti'i Al-Hanafi rahimahullah, his book Tawfiqur Rahman. He has a 1-volume book called Tawfiqur Rahman. He has a chapter on Qubbatus Sama also. And he doesn't say that the earlier commentators made a mistake. No, this is a conceptual idea, Qubbatus Sama. It doesn't contradict the geoid shape of the earth. It's in reference to the observation, because if someone's in the South Pole and they observe the skies, it's referred to Qubbatus Sama also. If someone is standing in the North Pole and they observe the sky, it's also referred to as Qubbatus Sama. Additionally, Shaykh Muhammad Zahid al-Kawthari, rahimahullah ta'ala, in his maqalat, he has a set of articles called maqalat. If you refer back to the maqalat, he mentions the hadith, the one you refer to in the Sunan of Imam Abu Dawood. Firstly, there's a weakness in the chain of transmission, which he points out, Shaykh Muhammad Zahid al-Kawthari, rahimahullah ta'ala. Secondly, the Qubbatus Sama, the concentric 7 circles, is in reference to the samawat, that they cover the universe. So that would be actually globular, meaning people in the South Pole and the North Pole are covered. The entire universe and the galaxies are covered by the first, the Sama'ud Dunya. Sama'ud Dunya is in reference to the doors of the first heaven. So we know from Sharh al-Sudur of Imam Jalaluddin Suyuti, for instance, that when the soul travels up, it travels through the door that is allocated for that soul. And what does it travel through? It doesn't travel through what we observe. It travels through beyond space-time, beyond what we observe. And then the first heaven comes, which is the first heaven. That is globular, meaning it covers, it's a concentric circle that covers the entire universes and galaxies. The same with the second heaven, the same with the third, until it reaches the Arsh. When it reaches the Arsh surrounds all of these. So the Kursi, first the Kursi surrounds the 7 heavens, then the Kursi is surrounded by the Arsh. And the linguistical meaning of Kursi is from takarrus, which means embedded. Everything is embedded inside of the Kursi. Then the Kursi is embedded inside of the Arsh. So these are non-observable things. Interestingly enough, Ibn Taymiyyah, he utilized this hadith with regard to the julus, even though he doesn't utilize the word julus, as taking the word istiwa literally for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's a different discussion. But the point is that this hadith or the commentaries that mention Qubba do not support flat earth theory in any sense of the word. In fact, they could be interpreted for the geoid theory, as well as, if people want to understand it to support the flat earth theory, it doesn't support it in any way or form.
So another question that came into my mind was regarding the Mount Qaf. In many tafsir it's mentioned, as well as in Tafsir Qurtubi, Tafsir Hashiyat al-Sawi as well, regarding that it's a mountain that surrounds the earth. So how would we explain regarding this mountain as well?
Okay, with regard to Qaf, firstly, the Qaf mountain is mentioned in commentaries, and they base most of the narrations are firstly questionable. So there is kalam people have said regarding Jabal Qaf, whether the narrations are questionable or sahih, meaning, as far as I know, there's no authentic undisputed hadith regarding Qaf. But let's say there was. Shaykh Abdullah Sirajuddin, rahimahullah, his son compiled his biography, which is available in 1,000 pages. In that commentary, he mentions the mountain Qaf, Jabal Qaf. And he says Jabal Qaf is not a physical mountain in this realm. Jabal Qaf is a mountain in Alamul Mithal. This is what he states, that in Alamul Mithal, the world of similitudes, there is a mountain known as Jabal Qaf. But there is no Jabal Qaf, a physical mountain in this world, meaning in our realm, that surrounds the world. Jabal Qaf is a mountain that exists in Alamul Mithal. Additionally, if someone were to take these type of Israeliyat, we know that there are multiple Israeliyat which mention things which we reject, like the earth, the globe being resting on the head of a bull, and whenever the bull shakes its head, the earth shakes. Now, these Israeliyat are mentioned in the books of tafsir, and even if commentators quote them in a way of in a way that they approve of the narration, it does not mean that those narrations are accepted without critical thinking. So Jablu Qaf in no way supports a flat earth theory, because what the flat earth theorists would attempt to say is Jablu Qaf surrounds the world and therefore we cannot get to the end of the globe. But a simple point refutes this. If I were to take a car from the UK onto a ferry and travel across the Atlantic Ocean, reach the coast of New York City, and then travel in the western direction until I reach California, and from California I travel in the western direction towards Japan, and from Japan to China, and from China across Russia, and from Russia through Europe back to the UK. How does the flat earth theory and the flat earth map account for the fact that I traveled in one direction and I did not reach the border of the earth, meaning the mountain that surrounds the earth? In the same way, if they say there's some force that changes my direction, why does the compass not show such things like the magnetic north? The magnetic north alone falsifies the flat earth theory. If someone travels up north following a compass, they reach the pole, and then they travel the opposite direction downwards to the south. Why do they not reach the edge of the universe? So Jablu Qaf does not support this claim.
So you mentioned flaws with the flat earth theory. You mentioned a few already. For instance, denial of atmosphere in the space, and a few others that you mentioned. What else is there in terms of inherent flaws with regards to the flat earth theory?
So practical flaws are in terms of using geometry, and when we utilize almanacs, for instance, when prayer time being 18 degrees below horizon, the sun is below horizon by 18 degrees. What model was Al-Imam Ahmad Rida Khan utilizing when he determined that the sun was 18 degrees below the horizon? That's a explicit approval of the geoid earth, meaning the geoid earth model works in practical purposes. Whether someone ascribes to the heliocentric or geocentric model of the earth, the flat earth theory does not work with calculations of prayers. Meaning, if we believe the earth was flat, additionally saying the sun and the moon is the same size, but we do know that the sun is around 93 million miles away. But if someone said the sun is the same size as the moon, and they believe that the sun goes around above the earth by only 3,000 miles, the sun moves around the earth, how do they account for the seasons, the 4 seasons? With the geocentric, with the geoid earth, we know the tilt of the axis by 23.5 degrees in summer and winter in the north and south pole. But how this model, meaning, is insufficient in accounting for so many things, one of them being the 4 seasons. How do they account for the 4 seasons? That there are 4 seasons in Britain, for instance. So if we drew our location on the flat earth map, and we draw a model of the sun, how the sun moves, we would have to account for why there are 4 seasons in the UK. So that is an additional flaw within the flat earth. With the watch, for instance, you can, if you're in the North Pole, you can calculate the the direction of the sun. Like if you have a watch and it's 10 a.m. on the watch, the small hand of the watch, you face that towards the sun, and then you draw a line halfway between the 12 sign and the direction of one of the needles, and it tells you the direction of a person is able to calculate the direction of the Qibla. How I wrote this down was using a watch in the northern hemisphere, get the watch, place the time needle in the direction of the sun. Then where the number 12 is placed, place a line halving the two sides. The top side is Junub, meaning south, and the bottom side is Shimal. This is a method. And in the southern hemisphere, it is in the following way. In this case, the number 12 is faced towards the sun. Then the halfway line is made between the number 12 and the number of the time. This is just one example that works in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. How would flat earth theory account for this disparity?
Shaykh Asrar, I didn't quite understand that. Could you explain it a little bit more fully?
So what they do is they get the watch in this hemisphere. We get the watch, we place in the daytime. If it's, for instance, 10 a.m., you get the small needle, you face it towards the sun, and then what you do is you draw a line from the number 12 and another part of the watch. So, for instance, here, I've got, can you see this image?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, here, that's 10 a.m. And can you see where I've written Junub? At the top. That will tell you the south, and that will tell you the north. Yes? So that's the south, that's the north. But when you're in the southern hemisphere, sorry, that's the southern hemisphere. When you're in the northern hemisphere, that's the model. So is another thing to add to that, when you go toilet and you flush the toilet, which direction does the water turn?
Never observed that, to be honest. But
Well, I've been to New Zealand and South Africa, which is below the equator. When you go to these countries, the water turns the other way around. So why in the North Pole is the water flushing to a different direction to the water in the South Pole?
I've actually seen this done as an experiment. Somebody was standing just north of the equator, and the swirl was going one way, and then they moved just south, only meters, a mile or so, just south, and the water was swelling the other way. I've actually seen this experiment on YouTube.
And also, if you place water on the equator, you'll see that the water moves both ways. So there's a point in some of these countries, there's a point where they've actually drawn a line to show you where the actual equator exists. Even though the equator is a conceptual thing, the point of the equator, if you put water on that point, the water will move in both directions. So flat earth theory would not account for this also. So there are numerous other issues with flat earth theory, like what I mentioned regarding geometry and the use of spherical trigonometry. When we make calculations for our Qibla direction, what method do you think that the Muslim scholars of the past utilized? Now, Imam al-Qurtubi wouldn't have had that problem, because when the Moroccans and the Spanish, they made the masajid, they utilized sometimes very simple geometry that today they know that the directions have been mistaken. So if you go Morocco, they pray with a slant, because the the masajid were built with a mistake in the direction. But in some places of the Muslim world, the directions are very exact because the scholars, they were utilizing geometry, spherical trigonometry, which pinpointed the direction of the Qibla to the most precise that they could make it. And this only works if you follow the geoid model of the earth. But if you follow the flat earth model, there is no way of calculating. So in the months of May, June and July, there is a point where the sun is directly above the Kaaba. In the months of May, June and July, there is a point where the sun is directly above the Kaaba. You find at the time for that, there's an exact time in the UK, 2 days in the year. Exact time, if you found someone in Makkah al-Mukarramah, they will tell you, yes, the sun is directly above the Kaaba, they can observe. You go out of your home in the UK and you will also see the sun. But if you see the sun, you are now observing the sun, which is directly above the Kaaba. You will notice that the sun is in the southern direction, which can only be accounted for by the geoid model of the earth. If you had a flat earth theory model, this would not account for the positioning of the sun. In fact, with the flat earth theory, there is no complete model of the universe. They have no complete model which can account for any discrepancy that is found. So there are numerous other problems. Like I mentioned, traveling in one direction, this cannot be accounted for. How can people travel in one direction? There is also the problem of how far the sun is. How far the sun is the flawed theory that the sun is only 3,000 miles away is actually very flawed. And then the eclipse, the shadow of the earth on the eclipse of the moon. This, someone on my Facebook page actually said that the disk shape of the earth you can observe the disk shape of the earth on the moon. So this would mean that when you have the sun, you have the moon, in the middle you have the earth, the earth would be like a wafer, in between, which doesn't make any sense. Because if the earth was a disk shape in between, the sun would be shining on one side of the earth and not shining on the other side of the earth. But we don't see that. What we see is that the earth is a surface and the sun is shining across the top of the surface. And then when we observe the shadow in the moon, we see a circular shape in the moon of the earth. This is, of course, we would have to take into account all the eyewitnesses who have observed the geoid shape of the earth. Remember, it's not difficult to see the geoid shape of the earth. All you have to do is invest in a balloon and a high quality camera and take the balloon up higher than the elevation that the flat earthers take the balloon to, because there's a point of elevation that if you reach that point of elevation, the earth looks flat. But if you increase the elevation, you will begin to see the circular shape of the earth. And there are many flaws in the information that is being presented by flat earthers on YouTube. There are inherent flaws, meaning misinformation in much of what they say.
Yeah, Sheikh Saab is like that person that did the jump from the edge of space. But the flat earthers say that the photographs or the video that he took was taken with the fisheye lens. That's why it looked circular rather than a normal lens.
But then they would have to discount his eyewitnessing. So what I mentioned about tawatur, mass transmission, some people objected to that also. They said you cannot take tawatur of disbelievers. This is incorrect. If you check the books of Usulul Hadith, they mention that tawatur is a concept that is not based on whether the transmitters are Muslims or non-Muslims. So non-Muslims can be involved in tawatur. And the second thing regarding tawatur, mass transmission relates to sensory perception. It relates to sensory perception. So an irrational concept, like saying Buddha is God, is mutawatir amongst Buddhists, but it's irrational. But if there's a report regarding sensory perception, then Muslims take that into account. Now, over 200 manned missions into space would mean hundreds of astronauts have observed the globe-shaped Earth. This would mean that although, and a third point regarding tawatur involves the experts in their field. So remember the works of hadith mentioned, they have a dispute on the number of tawatur. Why do they have a dispute on the number? Because the underlying reason for tawatur is that tawatu'uhum ala al-kadhib becomes impossible. Agreement upon lying becomes impossible. What the ulama could not decide is how do we determine this? With what number? Is it 10? Is it 70? Is it 50? So they were unable to determine this. But Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, and others said, the main point is that it becomes impossible for them to agree upon a lie. So the question would be, these hundreds of astronauts, were they all actors? Were they paid? All of these hundreds of astronauts who observed the Earth in that, and not only the astronauts, anyone else who has parachuted down from the top, are they paid? Or is it tawatu'um ala al-kadhib, impossible, the agreement to lie? They all agreed to lie. Is this an impossibility or a possibility? So these are eyewitness accounts with regard to observing the shape of the Earth.
I think, for those people who a lot of these technical words are probably going over your heads, but tawatur is basically mass transmission, and it's very, very implausible that such a large group of people got together to formulate a lie and then spread that lie. So we have this concept in hadith, where certain hadith are mass transmitted, meaning so many companions had heard a hadith and then transmitted it to the next generation and so on and so forth. So these are accepted and hold a very, very high place in terms of their strength. So the same concept is found in Western academia as well. In philosophy, you have this idea of testimony. So for instance, if I was to reject the existence of China, that's a rejection of testimony, because so many people have actually gone and witnessed China. So then to suggest that it doesn't exist is absolutely ridiculous. To reject it falls into skepticism. So that's also addressed in philosophy. Skepticism is basically denying everything unless you see it physically yourself. And I think a lot of the points which the Shaykh has mentioned does actually fall into that. We're skeptical about everything that we see. We're skeptical about what to take on board. But I think before we continue, because a lot of the inherent flaws that you've mentioned, I don't want them to kind of just linger around. If there's a rebuttal to some of them, I think it's good to mention them. So for instance, one of them is a very, very good, if it's a flaw, then it sticks. But that's how do we account for the 4 seasons in the UK according to flat earthers? How do we go about explaining that?
Okay, so the way that they explain it is, I'll just bring up this. Here's the flat Earth proposed map, and as I mentioned before, they say that the sun and the moon are much closer, equal in distance, and equally in size, and during because this is the North Pole here in the middle. And just to explain one other point as well regarding the direction. So if someone was to go from here all the way across, he will reach to this area here. But the way that the compass is used is that this is north and you will go towards the west, and it will be a circular direction because you'll be always the north. If you want to go west, whilst using compass, the north will always be in the middle for you. So whenever you turn, it will always face towards the north, the compass, if you get what I mean. And if you want to go east, it will be the same. So if you have north in front of you, you want to go east, you'll go around. So north will always stay in the middle, and that is how the navigation is done. And regarding the seasons, is that we say that in the winter time, the sun is it has an orbit. It goes outer towards the southern hemisphere, south, and in the summer it goes more closer to the north. So that is how in winter you'll see when it's frozen in the UK. Let me just finish this part off. In the winter in the UK, in the winter in the UK, it will be summer for the people in South Africa. Why? Because the sun is now closer to them on that side in its orbit, and when it's summer here, it's going to be winter there because the sun's orbit has gone closer to the north. So now the sun and the moon are in orbit and going out in the winter, and then coming in for the summer, and then again out for the winter and in for the summer, like this. So that is what the flat earthers say.
There's two inherent. The flows continue because magnetic north, as we know about pole shift, that the magnetic north does change. But if we accept that the magnetic north is in that fixed point, this still doesn't account for when a person travels to true north. After they reach true north, they decide to travel south. Now, south, you would not go in circles because you go straight towards the edge. So when you travel towards the south, the person would have to reach the South Pole, and then from the South Pole, they travel back up north. But according to this, they would end up traveling around in a circle again, never reaching the edge of the earth.
So north here, south, all the way around, and one going from here to the south. Once he reaches the south, the compass will automatically face the north, wouldn't it?
No, there would be two physical directions for him to travel. So if you go to the South Pole, you can travel north from one direction, and you can travel north from another direction also. So once the person reaches the edge, there's two directions to travel north, not one direction. And this can be attested by the hundreds and thousands of sailors, Russian, American, and remember, the Russian and Americans are diametrically opposed from the Bolshevik times until today. Russia and America don't get on. So there's no conspiracy of collusion of Russian sailors and American sailors that they travel in both directions. So you can travel, if you look at the north from our globe map, you travel south to the South Pole, but there's also from the North Pole the other way, which is from behind, and you travel to the South Pole. And this has been carried out by manned missions by people who've gone to Antarctica, hundreds and thousands of eyewitnesses who have done this physically. So again, the concept of tawatur comes in, or conspiracy of collusion. Do we go with the conspiracy of collusion, or do we go with the eyewitness accounts of all those thousands of people?
An answer that they will give is how many people have gone exactly across. So from the globe Earth, we have Antarctica. So from one end to the other end, how many people have gone? So people say that inshallah.
But we can say confidently. We can say confidently. For instance, on Earth today, there's 7 billion people. In human history, just in the past 100 years, at least over 1,000 people have done this. At least over 1,000, meaning the military alone, Russian military alone, has carried out these exercises. Why I mention the Russians are very close to the north, and the Russians do have a presence in the North and South Pole. America, which has the most military bases in the world, I can say confidently, has also thousands of soldiers who have traveled that direction. And China, which has a military presence on this globe, they have also hundreds and thousands of soldiers who have carried out these missions. Likewise, what I mentioned with regard to even the Pakistani intelligence utilizes a geoid shape of the earth.
Just going back to your 4 seasons and the sun moving is further to the North Pole in the summer and closer to the South Pole in the winter. But we all know that the Earth moves around the globe in 24 hours. So does that mean in our winter the Earth's moving faster? Because going by the circular model, the Earth has got to move exponentially times faster to get all the way around in 24 hours.
Well, as you know, the flat earthers won't agree to that because they'll say that the Earth is stationary. That is one of the concepts of the flat Earth. Yeah,
no, the Earth is stationary, but the sun, in flat Earth theory, the sun is moving.
Yeah.
So when the sun moves nearer the North Pole, in 24 hours, it's made one complete circle, hasn't it? In 24 hours.
Yeah.
So it's got to move at a certain speed. Let's say the sun is moving, the Earth is flat. So the further away it goes from the North Pole, it still does that one circle in 24 hours.
Yeah, it would.
It's got to move faster.
I'll look into that. But
a lot faster.
And hence why we have the days shorter and the days.
And then we would have to take into consideration places where the sun doesn't rise for 6 months, and where the sun doesn't set for 6 months, which is the North and South Pole. Both in the North and South Pole, there are places where the sun doesn't set or the sun doesn't rise for 6 months at a time.
Yeah, in them areas, if you also notice that there's also videos available of this as well, where you can see the sun circling that area. So instead of dipping down on the horizon, it will just carry on, just slightly going a little bit on and then carrying on its circle around.
But there's 2 problems with that also, because what the flat earthers, they say one side of the sun is cool and the other side of the sun is hot. They also ascribe to this.
I'm not sure.
Okay. But with the geoid shaped Earth, the observation of the sun going around, meaning from the point of the observer, is only because of the globular shape, the geoid shape of the Earth, that to the top, meaning the degrees from the horizon decrease. So ostensibly, it looks like the sun is going around that part of the Earth. This is only from the point of view of vision. There's another thing here also. What's not being discussed is gravitation, meaning the flat earthers deny gravity, but also relativity. So relativity, which is what the bending of space-time requires a circular planet. This is something which is overlooked by flat earthers, or they will deny the very existence of gravity, which they do. They deny, so they use fallacies like saying why helium exists, for instance. Such type of fallacies, because helium goes up. So they say, therefore, gravity doesn't exist. And there is also a dismissal of relativity. So these are a few things also to take into account.
There's a few questions. So you know when you mentioned Imam Ahmad Raza Khan uses when he determined that the sun goes below the horizon by 18 degrees, and he used the geoid model. Could that have been achieved using any other model, i.e. the flat earth model and their theory?
No, because the almanacs that he utilized were actually produced by the Royal British Astronomy Associations, and they used the geoid model. With the flat Earth, the northern latitude and southern latitude and longitude, all of these ideas changed. So from Greenwich Mean Time, and all these various concepts, they all rely on a geoid Earth, not on a flat Earth model. All of this would become defunct. We would have to have new methods of calculation.
Is the same applying for, you mentioned geometry and spherical trigonometry and how that model is used, the geoid model is used to determine Qibla directions. Is there any other way of determining it other than the geoid model?
Well, with the flat Earth, you would just draw a line with a ruler on a map.
Yeah.
So you draw a line and you say that's the direction of the Qibla. So, for instance, in North America, the direction of the Qibla, if you use a flat Earth, would be the eastern direction. But the correct direction is northeast, because of we know of the Mercator projection map gives people the idea that the direction of the Qibla is just a line in the map which goes towards to Mecca. But in reality, it's northeast, and this can be physically proven from the stars, as well as the sun, and other methods, meaning the precise methods of measuring the direction of the Qibla. So in previous times, when they measured the direction of the Qibla, they would use local stars, localized stars. In Yemen, for instance, there are certain stars there is a particular star that is above the Kaaba, and they measured the direction of the Kaaba. But as I mentioned, there's other flaws which the flat earthers need to answer, like the position of the North Star. When you go south, why does the North Star begin to go in the direction of the horizon? This is something they need to respond to also.
Yeah, I think as well as that, I think the point you mentioned regarding the sun being directly above the Kaaba during the months of May, June and July, and how the sun is then in the southern direction, is there a response to that? Is there like an explanation?
Regarding the sun being directly above the Kaaba?
Yeah.
It will just be said that it's the course, the orbit that the sun is on is at that point directly above the Kaaba. I'm not sure what else they would say. One point regarding the previously made points about the lunar eclipse. So there's a lunar eclipse that happens where both the moon and the sun are visible at the same time. The name given to that is a celestial eclipse. So a lot of the flat earthers, when they give this, when they objected to this, they give this as a proof that if there was the shadow of the earth, then at that time, when both the sun and the moon are visible, there shouldn't be no shadow on the moon because of the direction, or you can say the orbit that the earth and the sun and the moon are in at that time.
The objection on with regard to the eclipse is when the earth comes between the sun and the moon. So if you're observing the earth, the sun and the moon at the same time, there is no shadow of the earth. But the shadow of the earth is only reflected on the surface of the moon when the earth comes between the sun and the moon.
Yeah, so this special eclipse is actually where you can see the eclipse happening on the moon, as well as you can see the sun and the moon as well at the same time. I'll inshallah forward to Ustad Kamran what that exactly is, the research behind that as well, the name of that eclipse.
No, in that particular eclipse, you mean that the observer can see the sun and the moon separate?
Yeah.
So what is being eclipsed?
So one side, exactly, that is the point that they've made, that exactly what is being eclipsed there. So you can see the sun, you can see the moon, and you can see the moon being eclipsed where the redness is there on the moon. So that is what.
But you can see the entire moon.
Yeah.
So when you see the entire moon, this again comes down to the rays of the sun. Are they hitting a particular surface of the moon, a particular part of the moon, as opposed to the entire moon?
Well, in the actual eclipse, that happens is you can, on one side you've got the sun, on the other side you've got the moon, and you can see them both completely. But the moon has the shadow on it, the red shadow on it, meaning that it's eclipsed.
So when the moon is eclipsed, this is simply because of the angle of the rays of the sun are hitting the moon, because the moon is not in direct alignment with the sun. That's how you explain that. The eclipse in question is the one where the earth is in alignment with the moon and the sun. That is the one that is utilized as a proof for a globe earth. But the eclipse you mention is when there is no perfect alignment between the moon and the sun, and a specific part of the moon.
It's the whole moon, in fact, actually. The full moon is red.
The full moon is red.
Yeah.
But you don't see the shadow of the earth or something similar to the shadow of the earth.
I think in the other lunar eclipse, which you're on about, where in the orbit, the sun, the moon, and the earth are all in line. In that one, it's the same thing, isn't it? With the red shadow on the moon.
They won't be the same. They'll be totally different.
Okay, inshallah, I'll have a look into that, inshallah.
Just to kind of wrap things up, I think a lot of the stuff has been cleared, and it's been a really good discussion. But you mentioned tabatul, mass transmission, and then of course another can of worms was the moon landing and how people reject the moon landing. So what's your take on that? I know you've released a short clip from a lot of the video.
They stopped the moon landing, moon missions in the American government cut funding in the 1970s from moon missions. And the reason, meaning the budget, if you check in fact checking, it's always essential to be precise. So if you go and check, you will notice that there were drastic cuts in the moon landing to NASA in the 1970s. This is why NASA didn't go on the moon again, because there were cuts made, because the American government didn't see any further benefit for more moon missions. This is a fact. So the conspiracy theorists say the fact that there have been no moon missions shows that it was a hoax in the first place. Well, there are intended moon missions in the next few years, I think 2023, but then additional claims are made that the technology was done away with. So the technology was done away with, and therefore this means that the moon missions were hoaxed. The simple response to that is that when the technology was set aside after the initial moon landings, the upgrade of technology throughout the decades entails that if NASA now carry out any moon mission, they would have to replan the entire program. This is the meaning of that. So for instance, if you had a car in 1950s, and then in the 1950s that you were not allowed to use that car in the 1950s, 50 years go by, and then I say now you are permitted to invent a new car, you would look at the new advanced technology that has been made in the past 50 years, and you would redraw your plans of a new car. You would not use the same car that you used in the 1950s. So the conspiracy theorists say, well, the technology was as simple as a calculator in that time. How could they have gone on the moon with technology as simple as a calculator? The response, if you ask engineers, they'll tell you that that's like mentioning, if you remember in the cars in the 1980s, when you would have a petrol problem, what would they do? They would take out something of the engine, a metal rod, and then they would measure the oil, and then they would, an analogous method of wiping the oil and checking. But now technology has developed that you have digital methods of checking the oil. This change of technology does not mean that you were unable to drive in the 1980s. So the advancement of technology from 1969 to 2020 does not mean that they did not have the technology to travel out to the moon in 1969. It just means that technology has advanced. So if NASA intends space travel again, they redraw their plans in accordance with the updates. This is all that it means. So they mention the Van Allen belts, the radiation belts that are 30,000 miles away from Earth, which if you follow flat Earth theory, there is no way of determining whether there is any radiation belt. How would you determine that? Because you do not believe in satellites. In fact, many of them believe that the International Space Station is a hoax. So the Van Allen radiation belt, for instance, they say, how did they penetrate that? It's impenetrable. Well, if you can send droids into space, which is a proven fact, how that on the moon they left reflectors that today you could get lasers. We can do this from home. You get powerful lasers and you reflect the lasers off the moon, and the reflectors will reflect back the laser. So how did they place those reflectors? The conspiracy theorists, they say they placed drones or non-manned missions that placed those reflectors. That is fine. But to send a man onto the moon, all you need additionally is protective gear. And protective gear has not changed from 1969 till 2020. You may have improvement, but they had protective gear in 1969. In fact, spacesuits, the amount of effort placed in spacesuits is, as people think spacesuits are simple suits, they are advanced technology spacesuits. So if a probe could go out into space and pass the Van Allen belt, a man could be sent also through the Van Allen belt with a spacesuit that protects from radiation. But radiation is higher in astronauts than common people. If you check the level of radiation in astronauts, it's always higher. Other objections they have is, why did they not see stars on the moon? So when Neil Armstrong and the others, Buzz Aldrin and the others, were asked, why did you not see stars on the moon? And they were asked, did you see stars on the moon? They say no. This is because they landed on the illuminated side. So when they landed on the illuminated side, where the sun is reflecting off the moon, they would not see the stars, similar to the way we do not see the stars in daylight. Or sometimes they make the claim that if they landed on the illuminated side, it would have been too hot for them. This is false, because at the time when the sun was reflecting off the moon was further from the sun than the earth. So the earth was closer to the sun than the moon itself. So like this, if you follow through all the various objections, there are claims and then there are counterclaims. So, like stating that Stanley Kubrick, the director of movies, who passed away mysteriously also, I think in the 1990s, they say Stanley Kubrick, the famous director, he was the one who made the movies for the space landings. These are claims that are not substantiated in any way or form. Or for instance, claiming that the camera, when the rocket launches itself from the moon, which is also an objection. They say, how can it have launch pads on the moon? The response is simple, that there is no, the gravity is less on the moon. So launch pads, they launch the rocket very easily. Unlike Earth, there's the gravitational pull on Earth is higher. So therefore, NASA needed more advanced technology for Earth, but for the moon, the rocket pads are simple. But once the rocket launches, or the space shuttle, spaceship launches, the camera moves up. So they say, who manned the camera? Even though they falsely placed this in the 1969 moon landing, in fact, it's from 1972. A person should use common sense that if NASA could invent rockets that went into space and spacesuits, why would they not be able to invent a camera that is automatic and moves up? So they bring another objection. They say, why are these shots different in each moon landing? So in one moon landing, the camera is close, in another it's far. And in the 1972 moon landing, the camera has a perfect shot. The answer is very clear, that the astronauts, when they placed the cameras before leaving, some of them placed them too close, some of them placed them too far, and that particular shot, the angle was very good. So whoever placed that at that point, the angle was very good. So like this, they mentioned the objection to the flag, you know, the flag moving, they claim, in the Hollywood studio. But the response is very simple, that because they were going to a vacuum, they needed a flag that stands up. So they placed springs at the back of the flag, and they were fixing those springs at the time of placing that flag upright. So like this, if you chase up all the objections, they do not stand up to scrutiny if we employ our Muslim method, meaning as Muslims, if we apply our epistemology on these conspiracy theories, those conspiracy theories do not stand up to scrutiny. There are many additional questions, like the collusion between Russia and America. Why would they collude on a geoid Earth? Why would Russia, China, and America collude on this? And including all the Muslim governments. Why are they colluding? So there are, in fact, there are more unanswered questions from those who deny moon landing.
Mm-hmm. What's the stance regarding the telemetry data as well? That was lost.
Which thing?
The telemetry data of the moon landings that was lost by NASA. They say that we've lost all the telemetry data.
So the data, what they mean by the data was lost, once the moon landings were finished, these type of records are set aside. So after 50 years of records being set aside, it doesn't essentially mean that the data is lost in the sense that they purposely took all the folios and they burnt all the folios. It means when something is abandoned for so long, and the staff think from the 1960s till 2020, all those staff members, 40,000 staff members, have either reached real old age or have died. So the data now is useless. So they would have to redraw the plans to go onto the moon again. So we wait 5 years. There are manned missions being projected. So when they go on the moon now, in the next 5 years, where would the flat earth theorists show their face? Meaning when it occurs now in the next 5 years, why would they make the proclamation that they are traveling to the moon in the next 3 years or the next 5 years if it was all false in the first place? So it not only falsifies flat earth theory, it also refutes moon landing deniers.
Sheikh, I've got one more question. I think then we'll wrap up. It's been very educational. But you know how you just mentioned now that as Muslims we should apply our own Islamic epistemology, especially to conspiracy theories. I think as an idea it's very good, but I think now living in 2020 and advancing forward, we have now technology which is very advanced, and if you go back 1400 years and look at this concept of tawatur, where there's so many people who've heard something and then transmitted it, and then it becomes very implausible to suggest that they all gathered together to formulate a lie. In 2020 now it's different. With the amount of technology that we have, communication is now very easy from one country to another, very quick. The quality is excellent. Would you now say that it is actually plausible for large groups of people to get together to formulate a lie and then spread it to the point where there's a whole discussion which becomes the subject of discussion, which is whether it's a conspiracy theory or not? I mean, looking at it now objectively, can we still apply this tawatur concept in the modern era?
To wrap up on that point, one other objection that the moon landing deniers mention is communication. They say if we are stuck in a lift and our mobile doesn't work, we cannot contact anyone. How did they communicate from the moon to Earth? If you check with any engineer who deals in communication, they will tell you regarding the means of communication, particular names of telescopes and technology which was available in the 1960s by which such type of communication was done in that time. So this is just another fallacy which is mentioned by them. You check with anyone who's an expert in communication, they will tell you regarding the types of communication that was possible in 1969 from the moon to Earth, meaning analyzing that with the mobile phone is a false analogy. But what you mentioned regarding tawatur, what that is, can we apply the rules of tawatur in the age of modern technology where people can concoct a lie? The answer is yes, you can still apply the methodology. How? If you notice in my definition of tawatur, I said experts in their field. So if doctors tell us that there is a flu virus, and all the doctors agree to this, the experts in their fields, this would count as tawatur. What would make this impossible for them to concoct a lie is for us to believe that all the governments of the world have enforced this view on the doctors to promulgate or propagate this false information amongst the public that there is a virus, and all of them are in agreement. And all of them, when they say they observe patients with the symptoms of a disease, of a particular disease, all of them have agreed to lie on this. This would be impossible, even through means of communication, because the experts, mutakhassisin in that field, have agreed. So when I said tawatur of the globe Earth, that is based upon experts in their field, that we would have to say there is collusion of all the people who have gone to space, starting from the Russian first man who went to space. If you remember, first they sent out a dog, then they sent a man. Starting with him, I forget his name now.
Yuri Gagarin or something like that.
Yes. So Yuri was the first man to collude in this lie. Then all the 200 plus space missions, and they've not had a single astronaut say that this is a lie. So experts in their field. But then there's additional eyewitnesses and additional proof and evidence which reinforce this view. So if, however, the means of communication make and concoct a lie amongst non-experts, then the possibility of lying is there. So the main rule is how do we determine tawatur is the possibility of lying is ruled out. Once the possibility of lying is ruled out, then we know that there is mass transmission.
But wouldn't that leave it to, I mean, you're right in that they have to be experts in their fields, but then you have to be of, a considerable knowledge to be able to determine, somebody's credentials, to then determine whether he's an expert or not in his field. As far as we know, I mean, in the case of moon landing, we're told astronauts have all agreed and there's nobody who actually objects to it. But in terms of their credentials, we don't really know anything about them, apart from a number which is projected. I don't know how many thousands or hundreds there are, but I think modern technology has caused a huge issue now, especially with tabloids and with media outlets. There is this idea of formulating a lie in order to convince and deceive masses of people. And that's something we are witnessing. I don't know on what level in terms of the number of people that are getting together to formulate a lie, but is there any way of tweaking what we've used? Because the concept of tawatur, using it in usul al-hadith is different to the way we would use it in anything non-religious. So for instance, conspiracy theory. So is there any way that you can actually tweak it to fit this modern era?
So yeah, there would be methods of tweaking the information that reaches us, but determining tawatur is not always the task of the layman. That's another point that is ignored by people, that sometimes there are field-specific issues that only field-specific people can determine. So scientists, like if you talk to a learned person in science who has studied physics, for them, these things are badihi, meaning, what do I mean by badihi? Intuitive, self-evident. If you talk to someone who has studied physics, they will give you a response to all these objections because those things are badihi for them. So therefore, the tawatur is sometimes determined by experts in the field also. So determining political facts, determining the numbers of a genocide, even if the genocide is mutawatir, the experts in the field of history and geography and geopolitics will tell us what is actual mutawatir in this regard. So this is also left to the experts in that field. So determining the tawatur of the moon landings is left to the mutakhassisin in that field also.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Jazakallah, Shaykh. Is there any questions before we wrap up?
A question. Yeah, just sorry. Can I just ask? Sorry. Just on a related topic, the geocentric model. Both when the Shaykh mentioned this, and the Shaykh, like you said, as recent as Allah Hazrat accepted this model. How do we read into that now?
So your question is what?
Around the geocentric model, the Earth taking the center stage.
So the geocentric and the heliocentric model, both of these models are working models. That's what makes them different to flat Earth. So if someone ascribes to geocentric simply because of their observation of the celestial bodies on Earth, when they're on Earth, they observe the celestial bodies and they ascribe to geocentric model. The geocentric model doesn't have flaws in how certain things are determined, like the Qibla direction, the prayer times, and it's a tried and tested model for nearly 2,000 years, or over 2,000 years. But where the geocentric model fails is in advancements of technology. So modern technology has been tuned into heliocentric. So when we apply geocentric in certain modern technologies, we would have to leave the geocentric and move to heliocentric. But geocentric is not deemed absurd like flat earth theory. Geocentric is still a respectable model because it worked. It's a respectable scientific model.
Yeah, that's fine. So, because it worked for such a long time before, we had the modern knowledge of the planets. So, in terms of Allah Hazrat accepting that and Allah Hazrat's position, what do we say about that now?
So, Al-Imam Ahmad Rida Khan, his position for his time was not unscientific. You cannot say he was unscientific because he passed away in 1921 and he refuted Galileo and Copernicus and Newton. But the level of knowledge of astronomy and physics of Al-Imam Ahmad Rida Khan in today's day and age would be the level of what we refer to amateur astronomers who have good knowledge of the celestial bodies. They observe the celestial bodies with a telescope. They have good knowledge, a working knowledge of geometry and spherical trigonometry, works like Sharh al-Tirmidhi and other Hellenistic style works. This was a good way of his for his time. But if he had known of the advancements, because remember, relativity was Einstein wrote his work on relativity in the 1900s, after 1910, I think around 1916 or 15. So Al-Imam Ahmad Rida Khan would not have been familiar with that work because he doesn't mention Einstein, he doesn't refer to relativity in his works. And then after relativity, Einstein deemed certain things impossible, like quantum theory. But quantum theory made so many advancements and leaps of 20 to 30 years after Einstein that if Einstein himself had observed those advancements, he would have been, shocked to see those advancements of science. Einstein himself in 20 and 30 years. So the advancement of science in the past 100 years has shocked the minds of the layman to such an extent that many of them move to conspiracy theories in order to explain that which they find unfathomable, that which they find incredulous. Because they are laymen in that field, they find it incredulous, the advancements of science in these 100 years, that they resort to conspiracy theories. So my point is that Al-Imam Ahmad Rida Khan and Al-Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi and others, they followed the science of their times, did not go against the science that they knew. But if they had observed the advancements of the past 100 years, they would have made a shift, a shift to a different model of what they took previously. A paradigm shift would have occurred for them.
Right, I think Majid has a question as well. The other Majid.
Shaykh Asrar, thank you very much for joining us this evening and for your presence. It's very, very kind of you. My question, it might seem a bit simple or it might seem a little naive, but I have enough of a problem in reading namaz and just trying to be a good Muslim. So what difference does it make to me as a Muslim if the earth's flat or if it's round? I mean, in reality, what difference does it make to us? Does it have any bearing?
In today's day and age, there was a video of a famous Muslim personality who mentioned just the stationary earth, which is the geocentric model, which, as I said, is not absurd like flat earth. This was utilized by the North American former Muslims, a group of people of North American former Muslims, ex-Muslims, in order to make a mockery of Islam. So we as Muslims, when we discuss science and the advancements of science, or when we discuss the Quran, we have two things to battle. One is Muslims who reinterpret the Quran and disregard those things which are known in religion by necessity, claiming that they ascribe to science, even though they are not advanced in science in any way. And the second group of people are those who make a mockery of Islam. So if Muslims start to ascribe to conspiracy theories or flat earth theory, they make a mockery of our religion, because people ascribe this to the deen, to the religion of Allah, when Al-Islam is free from this. So therefore, as laymen, as Muslim laymen, it's essential that we as Muslims do not fall into that which is anti-science, because Islam is not an anti-scientific religion. Like telling people today that they do not need to use antibacterial hand wash because there's no proof for such things working. This is going against the empirical proof that there is, against a proof that viruses exist, bacteria exists, and therefore we are placing, any people who claim as such are placing the lives of people in danger. So it's essential that we avoid nonsensical claims.
I think that's a very good response, and that's why I said at the beginning that we have no qualms in disregarding some of the statements of prolific scholars like Imam al-Qurtubi, rahimahullah ta'ala. There's no harm in that, because if you can disprove it as it has been disproved, then there's no harm done, and it's not tantamount to disrespect or anything like that.
As long as the given position is not ijma', real ijma', meaning consensus, there's always room for dispute.
This question was regarding what you mentioned about the moon landing. According to what NASA have written, is that the camera that was on the moon when recording, it was automatic, manually controlled from the Earth. A question that will arise in people's mind is, when speaking to the astronauts, there was some latency, but in the video there was no latency in the video. So how would one answer to that objection?
So the objection is, when they were communicating, audio communication, there was a delay. And when there's video projection, there was no delay. Is this the question?
That's part of the question, as well as when they were controlling the camera from here, there was no delay at all when controlling. So how can we understand that point?
You see, again, if you follow up on that and you ask experts on the camera regarding the camera and the technology that was used, which I haven't done, but if you do find out from experts in their field, this is where it's very important that I mention experts in their field. They will give you a valid explanation as to why the camera was able to move upwards. Firstly, I'm not sure whether the camera was controlled from Earth, or whether the camera was set up in a way that the camera would record in a specific way. Meaning it could have been set up in a way on the moon to actually record in a specific way. But if you ask any engineers or people who are experts in that field, they will be able to give an adequate reply. What we are falling into is what we, for instance, when we criticize Salafis, the Salafi layman who gives fatwa based upon what he reads from Quran and Hadith. As Sunnis, we should understand that there are people who are experts, mutakhassisin in their field. When it comes to the space landings, the mutakhassisin are these astrophysicists, the scientists, and the engineers who are behind those space landings, as well as those who are familiar with such technologies. So this question can be posed to them, and if people start relying on YouTube videos for their information, they will additionally find the counter rebuttals of experts. So like you have rebuttals of the moon landing deniers, you do have counter rebuttals of the experts, and you will find the counter rebuttals. But I would rather take the explanation of an expert than someone who is watching YouTube videos or reading Wikipedia and taking his information from that. Like we went through years of study for Islam, we would take this, the people would take our opinion over the opinion of a layman who reads Wikipedia or YouTube videos to formulate an opinion on Islam. So this question, again, I would say the experts have answered these objections, and they need to be found.
Another point that I wanted to ask was in regards to Surah Al-Rahman. If any Hafiz is there, Ya Ma'shar al-Jinn.
Ya Ma'shar al-Jinni wal-Insi in istata'tum an tanfudhu.
Yeah.
An
So here,
tanfudhu.
The word aqtar was used. A lot of people give the translation of kinara in Urdu. English, we can say the edge or the boundary. What would we say in regards to the ayah?
So that verse, you see, you have min aqtari samawati wal ard, and you have fi aqtari samawati wal ard. Which one is in the Surah Ar-Rahman?
Min.
So if you have fi would mean if you are able to travel within the aqtar, famfudhu, then travel. But min means leaving. Min aqtari samawati wal ard means if you are able to leave the aqtar, which is the known universe and galaxies, which we say is impossible. Human beings can never leave in our physical bodies. We can never leave the known galaxies and universes. So this doesn't contradict space travel.
The point was in regards to aqtar, kinara. What would we give the translation for that for those that believe in the globe?
Again, aqtar, the aqtar is plural of qutr. So in modern Arabic, when there's a qutr, if you talk about a country, a region, so the verse would translate as aqtar, the regions of the heavens and the earth. If you are able to leave them, then leave. But we are not able to leave. So aqtar is all the regions of the heavens and the earth.
Okay, so will we say that there's a different region for the earth and a different region for the sky, for the heavens, or will we say that they're all one region?
Min aqtari samawati wal ard is in reference to one as a whole.
Okay, Jazakallah. Another point that I wanted to mention is another verse in the Holy Quran. وَسَارِعُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ
وَجَنَّاتٍ أَرْضَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ.
Yeah, that's the verse, yeah. From here, sorry?
Regarding this?
Yeah, regarding أَرْضُهَا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. What would we give an explanation to this? Because in one of the tafasir, it's mentioned regarding the width of the earth and the skies.
Yeah, here again, if you understand ard, so you're stating that ard means width. So if it's a flat earth, it means ard. The response is very simple, that what we observe in the universe, so the ard of the observable universe that we observe is not flat. So the way it's not flat for the universe, the ard is also not flat. So the word ard is applied to the samawat and to earth. For the heavens, it's not flat, because we can observe it's not flat. You observe the what is around us. Likewise, the earth, it does not necessarily mean it's flat, meaning ard. Ard is the entire surface, and it's not only applied. It's not only applied on flat earth. The word ard is not only on a flat surface.
Understood.
If I have a ball and I say to you, arduha, it means diameter, a circular diameter. But if I have a circle and I say ard, then it's a plane on the plane, a line on the plane. So the word ard can be utilized for both.
Okay, Another point with regards to what a lot of people mention is the Bayt al-Ma'mur and how it's directly above the Kaaba, and how will that be possible on a rotating Earth, and which way will it determine which way it's up and which way it's down on a globe?
Again, the response is twofold. Number one, the Al-Bayt al-Ma'mur is, like you said, directly above the Kaaba. When the earth moves, who said the heavens do not move? And maybe this is the wisdom behind the Tawaf al-Kaaba. Allah knows best. But the Tawaf that we do 7 times, there are 7 heavens, we move 7 times around the Kaaba. Allah knows best whether this is representative of the heavens moving in accordance with the Kaaba. This is one response. Secondly, the North Pole is a human construct. We could easily draw a map from the Kaaba as the center point. We use the North Pole as a human construct. So all the maps that we have, 600 years ago, the maps were drawn with the south at the top and the north at the bottom, because these are human constructs like the equator. So the Kaaba is the central point, but because we grow up on the Mercator projection map or the globe, we think that it's essential that the North Pole is the center point. But the Kaaba is in fact the center point. So let's say the Khalifa is re-established and the Khalifa decides to reprint the maps and the globe with the Kaaba as the central point and then true north at a different point. This can also be possible. So if someone flew from the Kaaba and they went straight up, they would go straight into Baytul Izzah, and then from Baytul Izzah, every heaven has a Bayt until they get to Al-Baytul Ma'mur. But they would have to be following the spinning of the concentric circles together.
Okay, which way would we say will be up? That is, will it be wherever is directly above the Kaaba, meaning
directly above the Kaaba?
That will be up.
That would be the upward direction. Why was Al-Aqsa al-Sharif the point for Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, for the Mi'raj? Because even though the Al-Bayt al-Ma'mur is directly above the Kaaba, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa is Bawabatu as-Sama, the entry point. Additionally, if you dug a hole from the bottom of the Kaaba and you came out the other end of the globe, that is the bottom point of the earth. And if you travel into space for millions of light years, you will reach the 6th Earth-like planet. So this is detailed by Shaykh Abdullah Sirajuddin rahimahullah.
Okay, because of the rotation of the Earth, will that still be classified as the down point, or will it be, or the whole thing will be moving as well?
Everything would be in rotation together.
Okay.
Shaykh, just a final question and then we'll wrap it up. Kind of stepping aside from that, what you're talking about now, back onto the Tawatur issue. You know, the manifesto of communism is famously ascribed to Karl Marx, and for many years it was ascribed to him until it came to light that it was actually plagiarized, and he actually took all the information from a very obscure French writer, and he was spotted by an even more obscure writer. But then it came to light that he was a plagiarist and very cunning, very clever, very shrewd. But nonetheless, the work got passed out and regarded as Karl Marx's own original work, and is still regarded today as his work on communism, the manifesto of communism. Now, the issue is, this is a manifesto for elitist control. So in finance. These are experts in finance. And we know how the system manipulates people by selling us certain ideas of how the system works and how you can benefit and so on and so forth. Now, we know the capitalist system to be very, very fraudulent, but nonetheless, these are experts who are telling us X, Y, and Z, and there's kind of, that's across the board, because it all serves their interests, and we know that now. So that's an example of how you've got a class of people who are regarded as experts in their field, which is finance. But yet we know at the same time that that's not the case. We can't take their word for it. There's certain elements of things which they say which can be unfolded and done away with. So, I mean, that's why I was mentioning the idea of tawatur, and you mentioned them having to be experts in their field. But that's just one example of how experts have colluded to formulate a lie to then pass on to people, in this case for dominance over.
So the response to that would be twofold. One is that the claim was falsified by experts also. The experts regarding literature, they determine that the actual document is a plagiarized document. So that was eventually falsified. So falsifiability is there. Additionally, the tawatur relates to that which is hiss, meaning sensory perception. So there's no sensory perception involved here. The document was falsified later, and the sensory perception I'm referring to in the moon landing example is that there were eyewitnesses to the actual moon landing, meaning the astronauts who've been out into space and observed the globe. But there's not only astronauts, there are skydivers as well. There are people who've taken, there are additional proofs and evidences to support the idea also.
Well, with skydiving, I think, according to scientists, they will say that the curvature of the Earth isn't viewable at that point. Just about the video that was released, I tried to find in Tafsir Kabir the ijma that you mentioned. Is it possible you can probably give me the ayat which he mentions in his
Yes, so I return back to Mafatihul Ghaib of Imam al-Razi, and I checked al-Nazi'at and Wash-Shamsi, and I checked al-Ra'ad, and I checked al-Baqarah and al-Zumar, all the standard parts that mention the geoid earth. I couldn't retrace that passage, but I do remember reading that in reference to Al-Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi. And I mentioned afterwards to some people who inquired regarding it that I cannot retrace the passage, so I need to find that passage. Either it's in his tafsir or it's in another work. So I did check the tafsirs. Even though he defends the geoid earth, I couldn't find the passage of ijma. So I need to find that. And even if he mentions ijma, what needs to be looked at is he referring to ijma of the scientists of his age, or does he mean ijma of the Muslims? It would be most likely scientists, the Muslim scientists of that time, like Al-Biruni and others.
Also, in one of the other clips, you mentioned that that gravity is mentioned in the Quran. I wanted to probably get the ayat for that, or a reference for that.
أَلَمْ نَجْعَلِ الْأَرْضَ كِفَاتًا أَحْيَاءً وَأَمْوَاتًا. I think this is Surah Al-Qiyamah.
No.
Which surah is it?
It's not Surah
Qiyamah. Pardon?
I said it's not Surah Qiyamah. I'm not sure which surah it is though.
But kifata, have a look at the meaning of kifata, and also refer to the book of Shaykh al-Buti, Min Rawa'i' al-Quran al-Kareem. You will find reference to that.
Shaykh, Jazakallah khair for your time. There's a lot of information that was taken on board, and a lot learned. And these brothers appreciate you coming on and addressing the issue. And hopefully in the future, if we have further discussions that are of interest to you, then if you can come on board and share some stuff with us.
Inshallah. Inshallah.
Jazakallah, Shaykh Asrar. Thank you very much for coming.
Barakallahu feekum.
Okay, barakallah feekum. Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.